Uh, Good morning, everyone, once again. Uh, my name is Mahindo Barak, and I'm a software developer. Today, I'm going to demonstrate to you the SQL injection, and we're going to discuss together as we share the knowledge. So, I'm a co-lecturer with Dr. Drake, that is already on call. So, in this lecture, we'll not only look at theory, we'll also look at what? At practical of how we can make use of the knowledge that we're going to look at today. So I'll call upon everyone to be very attentive. As I've said, it's not going to be a non-stop lecture. It's going to be a two-session lecture. We'll have our first 60 minutes and then we get a break. Then after a break, we come back for the last session. So everyone should be attentive, knowing that we will have to rest at a point and make sure that you understand these things not only for classes or for exams passing, but also for implementing when you do your real world things. So this word, as I've heard from you and the experience that you have, I I can see that this word may not be really very new to you, but I can still believe that it may be new to some, and in the thing that we're going to cover, we're going to learn at least one thing that you didn't know before. So, with that much said, let's go straight to the business. And as I told you, the class will be interactive. Sometimes Dr. Drake will jump in, or even I'll have to ask some of you to do what? To say something in the lecture. So let's begin. So we begin by looking at our topic that we're going to look at, software security. That's the theme, and the topic is SQL injection, and the lecturer is Dr. Drake, and presented by Muhindo Mubarak. So let's see what we prepared for you. Okay, so this is what we're going to cover today. We'll look at what's meant by SQL injection. We'll look at what is really SQL injection. And we'll first look at what is meant by SQL. Before we go to SQL injection, we'll first look at discuss what is really SQL. Then we go to what is SQL injection. Because without understanding what's meant by SQL, you cannot understand what's meant by SQL injection. Then we'll look at programming languages that are vulnerable to what? SQL injection. Then we'll look at different examples of SQL injection with practicals as well. Then we'll look at how we can reduce the risks of SQL injection. And then we'll look at the summary or the conclusion of the entire lecture. Then we'll also hear from you if you can add or comment or anything. So that's how our today's program is going to go. And we'll have two sessions. So in case my internet shakes, don't hesitate to tell me and I will improve it. So let us begin. Let us begin, okay? So what's meant by SQL? Um, these will be like the one that you'll be seeing on your screen. They'll be like the standard definitions, but what I'll be saying will not be really standard, but it'll be the explanation of what you're seeing on screen. So SQL injection stands for what? For structured query language. And SQL injection, SQL, and SQL can let us do the following: can let us access and manipulate the database. So I see here another new term that we have not talked about. So I'm considering that everyone is a beginner here. So that we should all understand. I'll not take all of us at the same level at expert, because I believe some are still new, and maybe from this lecture they can get inspired to start and doing or understanding programming. So that on that ground is where I'll try to explain really almost everything, so that everyone, whether you're new, whether you're what, you should really understand everything that we talk about. So it is good for seniors because we're going to look at different programming practices, good practices, and then it's also good for what? For really, really, really beginners. Don't be there and feel like, I don't know these things. Let me just be there. No, I'm going to try to explain everything. For example, right now, we're seeing a new word surfacing that we have not looked at before, the database. So I'm going to just give you a meaning of database. Then into what we proceed. So what is meant by database? If you really never programmed anything, or if you don't have idea about programming, a database is a place where we keep what? We keep dynamic information in the system. For example, if you have a system, let's say it is a school system whereby every information of, students' information will be in that school system. So it means that it will reach a point where you'll have to click on a page and read the details about a particular student. So according to the way how we know, we write these things in files, or things in file like HTML file. It is very simple. You can design a page to show information of a what? Of a student, his picture, his name, and maybe his class. Okay, for one student. But you write that static HTML. But as you can hear, it is just static. It is not going to change. So what does it mean? If there are 3 students, then it means that you have to create 3 different files. If there are 10 students, it means that you have to create 10 different files. But now, what if they become so many? So does it mean that every time the school want to add a student in the system, you have to come and create a specific file for that student? Of course, it will be so problematic and very hard. So that's where the idea of a database comes in. A database is just a storage that will contain things that can change at any time. For example, if we use the use of a database, and we use the use of, and if we make use of the database and we make use of static things like HTML, we can be able to do what? To write only one file of HTML, and only we change the fields that we want to change. For example, we write a file that will be showing a profile of a student. So that file may have things that are going to change, like name, picture of a student, maybe, and also his current class. So you write that one file alone. So now in the database, you will save there things that change in time. For example, the name, the picture of a student, the link of a picture of a student, and the current class of a student. So in the database, you record them in the form of a table, rows, and you have maybe like 50 students, name, just only the name, the link of a picture, and the current class of a student. You have those one in the database. So it will be in form of what? In form of a row, but they will be just plain. So by making use of database, you'll be able to get that information and feed it dynamically in this HTML template, or this HTML what? HTML file. So if someone says, I want to see student number 1, he clicks on 1. So you just go to database, collect the information of that student number 1, and feed it in this one HTML file. So if you say I want to see student number 3, you click on 3. Then you go to database and fetch that information and feed those changing information in this one HTML what? One HTML file. So that means that by doing like that, we can dynamically manage a system. Any day, the school owner can add another student. Just the row will be added to the database. Then he can view it anytime in this static what? In the static file. So that is just one basic example that I can give you about the database and how you need database. It contains the data that is what? That is dynamic for a project. So things that change, we put them in that data. Then these things that are static, we put them in what? In a file. So things that change like name, what, sex, gender, etc. You'll be fetching them from database and display them in a what? In a file. So by making those two, then you'll be able to do what? To do things that are really, really dynamic and things that are amazing. For example, there is only one Facebook application. You'll download it on Facebook from Facebook. But if you don't know programming, can't you see it's interesting? I download the same Facebook and you also download the same Facebook. The things that I see, they are really different from yours. Okay, so what does it mean? It means that there's a database that shows my things according to my settings or my preferences, and also shows your things according to your. So that is, it just records rows, and only fields are the ones that I want that are changing. It is one application, but so many people are using it. Same source code. So how is that possible? Is by use of what? Of database. So if you didn't know database, that is what I meant. That's what is meant by database. That table, that group of tables that store lines that change in what? In our system. So let us base from here also to introduce what is meant by SQL. Yeah, okay. So let us also base from here to explain what is meant by SQL. Since we have got now a picture of a database, now then what is SQL? So SQL is the language that we use to communicate to database, okay? Remember, database is now a group of information, like for example, the database for mobile money, the database for students information, the database for the bank. So it will just have the records only, okay? So there must be something that we should be able to communicate from those records that in a database and display them, or send them the programming language that will display them to the user of the string. So that standard language that we use to communicate to get the data from the database, or where our storage is of information, that language is what we call SQL, or what we call structured query language. So there are different types, but there is only one way, or that logic of getting data from the database and display it, or and make use of it, is what we call what? Is what we call SQL. And that's why you're able to see us telling you that SQL lets you access and manipulate the database. So at this moment, I'll assume, I'll not even assume, I'll know that you now understand what's meant by database and what's meant by SQL and why we need both of them. So I think we can proceed. Don't worry, I'll ask questions as we proceed, but right now we are still early. It's still early, so I hope things will be self-explanatory. But in the middle there, we'll have to interact. So SQL now, SQL can retrieve data from the database. So according to the explanation that I've given, the explanation that I've given you, it means that now these things can now make sense. Database, you know, a place where we keep records, and SQL, that language that's used to collect data from the database. So it can be used to insert data. So when we have a new student coming to our school, we can be able to use SQL to insert that student, or to add that student in a what? In our database. So SQL can update records. Maybe this student, we made a mistake in his name. He wanted to be corrected. So we need to update or to edit. So it's the power of SQL to do what? To update the what? That information. So maybe at his name, for example, my name is Mubarak. So maybe the teacher who entered it, he put A at last. Then on my national ID, there's no A. So I'll come to the teacher and they say, there's no A at the end of my name. So we'll go and edit and remove that A and update the database. So it is the power of SQL that will send this information to that storage called database to change that name and update it to the new one that we have specified. So SQL can delete records. So, maybe a student has misbehaved. We have expelled the student from our school. We don't need his records from in our storage. He's wasting our space. So that what do? We delete that student. So how shall we remove him? So it is the use of what? Of SQL to remove that student from what? From our database. But here now you see how it is becoming now interesting. When it comes to delete, this delete can be useful, at the same time can be very, very harmful. For example, we have the same school system, and we are using it to store the school fees payment for maybe 1,000 students that are at your school. Now, if a person can access your SQL and delete, uh, and delete the records that shows maybe a student has paid. Okay. Oh, and delete like 50 records that shows students have paid. So what does it mean? It means that you'll not be able to access this data, and the student can come and approve that I paid, and then he tell you any amount, and then they lie you, or you have that kind of what conflict because of the data that was what that was lost. Or imagine that teachers have submitted their marks, then someone has an access to this SQL or this language that communicates with the database and come and delete all the marks. And it is the day of Parents' Day, and parents are waiting for their report card. So what does it mean? It will become a problem. So SQL is good, but also SQL is bad. And that's why we're going to look at SQL injection, and we see the problem where comes in. So now you can start relating where we are doing what, where we are heading. So SQL can create a new database. So a database is a storage. So you can have many systems, but on the same server. You can have a system of a bank, or maybe you can have maybe a system for employees and a system for students. So you don't want to mix these two information. Employees want to manage them from another place, and maybe the students' information to manage them from what? From another place. So those are two systems. So if they are totally two different systems, so it doesn't mean that you need to keep the information in one container. Like a database, we also call it a container. So it means that you don't need to keep the information in one container. So what do? You create two different what? Two different containers or two different databases. So how will you create it? It is the use of SQL. SQL, you can command it to create it. One container for students, another container for teachers or for employees. So I hope you're relating and understanding the power of SQL. SQL can create a table. So a table is a section, or it's a box inside the container that we use to keep related information. So you want to keep classes information and student information. So class information can be maybe P1, P2, and P3. And then student information, maybe Muhindo Barak, John Black, whatever, like those students. So you see that the structure of student information is not the same structure of what? Of the class information. So what do? You have to, in the same container or in the same database, you have again to partition it into what we call tables. And these tables will keep the related structures of information. So a table for students. So you keep information that are related to students. A table for maybe classes. It will keep the information about classes. A table for subjects. So things that have different structures, you keep them in different what? In different containers. And those, in different sections or in different boxes. And those boxes inside the big database or inside the big container called database, they are the one that we call what? That we call tables. So when I proceed and talk about tables, you'll not be confused that these are the tables that we no, these are the tables of database. Okay, so it's the use of SQL to also create a what? A table on a what? On a database. So SQL can create stored procedures. So sometimes you don't need to repeat ourselves. For example, I want just write a function that will be getting students in a specific class. So if I don't want to repeat myself, like select from this, where this, got this, I can write that one as one procedure, or what you call a function. Okay, so you store it on what? On database. So you'll just be giving maybe this function a specific ID and gives you the information. So I say I've created a function that will be showing me students who have the school fees balance X. So I just put the school fees balance X, and then that function does the whole logic and gives me the students who have uh, that school fees balance that I've specified. So who has that power to create that kind of a function in a database or that kind of a procedure in a database? It is what? It is SQL. So SQL can create views. So views, they are kind of tables, but they are which are should I call, that are not permanent. So a view can join like two tables. For example, you want when you collecting students, you want to collect them with their respective classes. But remember, we said the classes can be in a different table and student can be in a different table. So you have to join this table. So instead of you joining these tables every time, you can create what you call a view only one time, and will be joining these tables anytime. I mean multiple times anytime you want them. Okay. So it is a temporary table. So SQL can set permissions on tables, procedures, etc. So as you go deep into database, today is not about database, but I'm trying to give you enough light. As you go deep into database, you see now there is a need of permissions. Okay, who should be able to do this, who should not be able to do that because of security. Okay, so still it is the power of SQL to say, okay, only this user is the one who is able to do what? To delete. Only this user is the one who is able to add or edit. As you proceed, as you go deep into what? Into database. So those are called what? Permissions. So that is a brief introduction about databases and a brief introduction about SQL. I hope you can ask yourself if you really got something or if you totally lost. If you're totally lost, don't worry, we'll ask in the middle and we'll get you back. But ask yourself if you're relating. Either you're a real beginner or you're advanced developer. If you're advanced developer, make sure that I'm not lying. You'll learn something new. And if you're beginner, then make sure that you do what? That you learn the whole thing. So we proceed, right? So we now know what's meant by database. We now know what is meant by what? By SQL. I am being slow, I know, because we have the whole time and I've calculated. So don't worry and say the teacher is too explaining to me because I've calculated time and I want everyone to understand. Okay, so we proceed. What is SQL then? We have finished that. Okay, now what is SQL injection? We now know what's meant by database. We now know what's meant by what? By SQL. Now we proceed. What is SQL injection? So as you can see it on your screen, SQL injection is an attack that consists of insertion. I repeat, SQL injection is an attack that consists of insertion or injection. So this insertion, we're going to come here, but well, let us first read. Okay, let us first read the whole sentence and then come back and internalize and explain it properly. So SQL injection is an attack, okay, that consists of insertion or injection of a SQL query via an input of data from the client to the application. Okay, let's explain it. Because if I explain things early, the next one we just say, okay, I've already understood this. Okay, so SQL injection is an attack that consists of what? Of an insertion. So SQL injection is just nothing, an attack. So you know what I mean by attack? It means that something is malicious. So an enemy is trying to attack you, okay, to do something that is not right on you. So that's what meant by an attack. So an attack that consists of, or an attack that has something that is going to add something to your original SQL is what we call an SQL injection. And this attack is always made when we allow users enter information in our heart, in our system. You know, I'm now coming back to the explanation, right? So we know create systems, and most of the systems that we do, they have to be interactive. For example, every application that you have on your phone, every application, it has at least input. It has to collect something from you, so it can process it and show you the what, the information. It gets data and then process it and show you the information. You know the difference between raw data and processed information. I hope you know. So that input, for example, you're registering on what? On let us say on safe border. They'll ask you, hey, give us your phone number because we want to know where you are. I mean, we want to know how to contact you. So you'll have to enter your phone number. Let us not even go very far. That input where entering your phone number, that can be the first place where you can you can pass the SQL injection. So SQL injection, how does it come? It comes that the data that you provide to the application through that input is going to be saved on the what? On the database. And the only way you can save the data from the database is through SQL. So if the SQL is the medium, medium, one is medium, right? It's the medium that you're going to use to communicate with the what? The database. So that SQL or that bus or that car or that thing, if is the one that you can target, feed in something wrong, and it goes and mess with the what? With the database. So the ability of you, I mean the ability for someone to be able to successfully add something through the input, and this input is going to be entered into SQL, and then SQL will go to the database. So the ability for you to enter something on an input of a certain application or system that is going to tamper with an SQL, whether intentionally or even without you knowing, is what we call that the developer did not intend to, is what we call what? Is SQL injection. So SQL injection has just its sound. It is adding, injecting, inserting something that is malicious to this language called SQL that communicates to what? To database. And this problem comes most especially when you're collecting data from users. For you, you'll handle your project like a baby, like everything. You make sure when you're creating it, it's just you handle it like a baby, right? Then another person come and put anything. So for you, are not, when you're testing application, you're just putting maybe a real phone number and then submit, and then you see everything is okay. But someone will come and copy the whole JavaScript code and paste it in that field while you're asking him to enter the phone number. Then you just collect because you do not check and save on database. So the whole output can become a real mess on what? Database. So proceed, SQL injection is nothing but just an attack, can be intentional or even without being intentional, that involves adding something that the programmer did not intend into the SQL. So I hope we are understanding. So since I've explained the first, so the remaining one we see the kind of straight or self-explanatory. Now look at this sentence that has come. A successful SQL injection exploit can read sensitive data from the database, even modify the data. When you say modify, means insert, update, delete, and execute administration operation on the database, such as shutting down the DBMS or the database managing system. You see what we've been talking about. So if someone successfully finds a way to do SQL injection on your system, it means that he can do the following. He can insert data. You see, it's dangerous, eh? So a student has not paid school fees, but because someone Ainaka called you, he has a trick of doing SQL injection in your system. He can insert data. So if he can pay, he can insert data, a record that says this student has paid a specific amount of money, and he's even you're even owing him a specific balance. They come and collect a balance, yet the student did not really pay. That is the power of SQL injection. So it can update data. You're having a bad CGP. So if a guy knows how to do SQL injection, he can come to the system and change the CGP and make this guy graduate. You can delete data. You have bad records at university and you're saved in the school database, how you found maybe in crime, different crimes, etc, drugs, etc, but you want to be clean. So someone who knows that how to do SQL injection can come and delete this data from your database, and this student will appear clean. So when you want to penalize the student, So it will be like clean. And you'll be like, no, I set this information in the database, and they'll check the database while you're not there. And if they start it late, the date can do what can approve. So that is just a one scenario. But there are so many billions of scenarios that can show SQL injection can be harmful. So sorry about that. So there are so many. Just random thought. Flights run on programs on schedules. Now these schedules are stored in systems of database. So a flight is expected to land maybe at a specific time. Someone come and delete this record from the database of flights. So there's no record that shows that at this time a flight will be landing. So there are other flights. I mean, there are other aeroplanes that are coming on that runway. So the other one is already cleared, but the record is deleted. So what does it do? It will just come. It shows it is clear to be landed, and then the other guy has not confirmed it. So it will come and crash with what? With a plane that is on its running way. So there are so many scenarios. Okay, so many scenarios that you can do what and you can imagine when you have access to what ability to do SQL injection on different systems. So we proceed. I now hope you know now what is meant by SQL injection. You might not know exactly, but you now have the picture of what is meant by SQL injection. So SQL injection is a code injection or technique that might destroy your database. Okay, so this one can destroy even the database, the SQL injection. SQL injection is one of the most common hacking techniques. So one of the most common hacking techniques it is by use of what? SQL injection. So if you can be able to do SQL injection as you're going to demonstrate practically, you see that you can be able to see what you're not supposed to see. If you maybe a genius or maybe really powerful, do SQL injection on WhatsApp. You'll be able to see uh, people's different messages that you cannot be able to that you wouldn't have seen. Be able to see emails, but those things are really protected. But if your system is weak, someone can do a SQL injection to see or access what they're not supposed to see. And at the end of the thing, or the whole process becomes hacking. They hacked me and maybe release my nudes. So that's how SQL can become what? Can become really dangerous. And it is the most common that they use for what? For hacking. So SQL injection is the placement of malicious code in SQL statement. We have already talked about this, and this can be via a web page input. So when you ask the user, enter your username and password. For him, you don't enter the username and password because he knows how you wrote your SQL. He's a programmer like you. What does he do? He writes a counter SQL in that field that you ask that person to enter the username and put in things that are going to confuse your SQL as you're going to demonstrate. So at the end of the day, a programmer meets a programmer and he's able to log into your system without even your consent and is able to do what? To do mess on your what? On your system. So that placement of malicious code into that SQL statement that is going to communicate your database is what we call SQL injection. And this one can even be done on what? On the web page when someone enters the information in your system. Hope we are together. So SQL injection uh, usually occurs when you ask a user for an input. I've already explained this. The main problem is when you ask the user, please now enter your password. That is where the first problems become. Okay, that is also the first problem comes. Okay, like enter username, enter user ID, and instead of username and ID, the guy gives you an SQL statement that will unknowingly run on your database. Sometimes someone may not even be knowing. For example, you know what's this apostrophe? That apostrophe, is it apostrophe? I mean that okay, SQL has some characters. like apostrophe. So they must be in order, the apostrophes. So if someone's name has apostrophe, so what does it mean? It means that the apostrophe that is going to be entered by someone is going to mess with that one that is intended with in your SQL. At the end of the day, it either get what it's not supposed to get or crash your what? Your system. So it can be done even unknowingly. Nga muntu tamanyi n'abiteekayo. Kankana kintu nga kiyiise. So programming languages that are vulnerable to SQL injection. So that is a programming language. So I'm treating you like usually here like beginner, most people. So I will have to explain because some may get even inspiration from today's class to say, hey, I always fear these things. Let me try them. Okay. So that's why I'm trying to explain every point. And don't worry, we have our time and we'll finish. Okay. So what is a programming language? A programming language. So you have looked at three things. I mean, three things today. We have looked at HTML. HTML is the one that will be able to present the information on the screen of the user. We have looked at something called database. Database is that software or that storage that will contain these records that is dynamic on our system. The third thing that we have looked at an SQL. An SQL is a language that will be able to communicate with the what? With the database. So you now know those three things. Now there is one more thing, just one like this, that is missing for you to know how to make a complete system. And that one thing is called a programming language. So a programming language is that now brain that is going to process the logic between the data that has come from database through SQL and then process it and display it on the what? On the user's screen. So that guy or that brain that makes the condition, that makes the loops, that makes uh, the checks, etc. is what we call a programming language. That middle guy. I mean that middle, that middle. I'm sorry about the language. But I hope you're all youths here. So I hope yeah, we will connect along the way. So in that way. So that part, I mean that entity that does that whole logic, the brain of your software that is powered by the database through the SQL is what we call a programming language. Okay, so you have different types of programming language. We have PHP. Okay, so you've heard of something called PHP. We have Java. We have JavaScript. We have ASP. We have etc. C sharp. All of them. So those we have Python. So those are the ones that we call programming language. A Python is the one that will collect the password from HTML that you submitted, and then write an SQL that is going to collect this password from this information from the database, and then make a decision: is this password correct or not? So who does that? It is the Python or the language or the PHP. Okay, so that is the fourth thing that you need to make a complete system. I will summarize them. You need the front end or the user will interface with, which can be HTML. You will need the database, which can be my SQL database, which can be Oracle database, which can be NoSQL database. So you need the database. You need the SQL language. SQL language is the one that will communicate with the database, and then lastly, you need a programming language, the one that will do the what? The logic. So those are the four things. Now we look at the fourth thing right now, which is the programming language, PHP. So these programming languages, some people, some users, some creators who create them, some we are not really serious, or you can say they are not really creative. So they ended up making what? Making loopholes that can enable user to penetrate through them and make an SQL injection to our what? To our database. So which are these programming languages? So the answer is any programming language. any programming language as long as that interfaces with the database is prone. Okay, don't worry, we are remaining in 14 minutes to finish our first session, so don't worry, we're going to have our short break. So every programming language, as long as it communicates with database, is prone or can be affected by SQL injection. There's no any programming language that is really 100% sure that cannot be affected by SQL injection, because every day people get more creative, so you cannot guarantee. Okay, so you cannot say guarantee I'm using Python, so I cannot be able to maybe be affected with SQL injection, so cannot guarantee that. People become really creative every day, so never say that statement to someone who really know. So every programming language has weakness of SQL injection, but as we proceed we will see how we can mitigate. So the answer is there. Okay, so higher level programming languages affected by SQL injection. Okay, so let us look at them. Perl, Perl, that one, a friend with of PHP. We have Python, we have Ruby on Rails, we have Ruby, sorry, we have Java, we have ASP, we have ASP.NET, we have JSP, we have PHP and C# and VB.NET. So if we ask you in the exam, can you please tell us some programming languages that can be affected with SQL injection? You can see it is a simple, very, very simple language, because we have said every programming language that interfaces with the database. But don't answer it simply. First think. There are some programming languages that are not here. For example, JavaScript, HTML, some people call HTML programming language. So for you, maybe Leslie write CSS here, so which may not be right, because those programming languages, they don't interface with databases. So these JavaScript, does it affect the database? We can talk about that. Can always discuss. Okay, so then these programming languages and many more, as long as it can communicate the database, can be affected with what? With SQL injection. So the lower programming language, lower level programming language that can be affected, even the C, C++ can also be affected what? With SQL injection. So it will be up to your creativity of how you can limit this SQL injection. So if you want to learn more, go ahead and search this book. This book, Howard Deadly Sins. This is Dr. Drake's book, a favorite book. I hope he has shared with you. That's his PDF. So, page 6, Deadly Sins of Software Security. You will find the details about what we talked about today. So, examples of SQL injection. So don't worry, I'll give you opportunity to interact. I'm going to just give me more 5 minutes. I finish, then we will also talk something. Okay, so and then we'll go for our break. Yeah, simple as that. So let's look at examples of SQL injection. Then after, I think, yeah, let's do it like this. Then we come back, we go to practicals. Yes, let's do theory right now. Then we come back, we go straight to practicals. Okay, yeah. So examples of SQL injection. So you have different types of, different examples of SQL injection. In the first one, we have SQL injection based, based or based on 1 = 1 is always true. So that is one example of SQL injection. So when you come to do practicals, you will see how can this be done. How can someone use this one as an SQL injection? This is a fact. 1 is always equal to 1. So someone can use that one as an SQL injection. So that's one type that's already recognized. 1 = 1 is always true. Another type is empty string is always equal to empty string. So that's someone can base on that to do an SQL injection on your database. Another one is SQL injection based on batch SQL statement. So in database you have possibility to execute more than one statement in a database. I mean, in one SQL. So someone can use that one as a weak point, whereby he adds his second statement. He stops the statement and add the second one on the same SQL. Then for you, you execute. So what does it mean? It means that you have executed a batch or a group of SQL at one time. So that one becomes a what? A weak point. For you, write your SQL. Select where username equal to whatever the user has provided to you. So the guy knows that according to experience, this is how you write SQL. So for him, he stops your SQL by putting that character and go ahead and do what? And write another SQL. Then for you, just collect that string and execute on your database. Boom. You have executed two SQLs at the same time, or two statements at the same time. So that can also be used as a what? As a weak point. Another fact or another weakness that is known for SQL injection is SQL injection based on a batch SQL comment. So someone SQL you can in SQL you can as well comment. You know, comment is something that is not meant to be executed in a certain programming language, right? So someone can say from here he writes a character of commenting, so he comments the remaining part of your SQL. Then he starts writing for his what? His own SQL. So doing that way, so it means that your SQL, your real SQL that you meant for, won't be effective, but his, because he has already commented it, but his, and he end up doing what? End up executing it. So it becomes a problem. So basing on these facts, it can prove that really SQL injection can be done. So SQL injection based on one equal to one. We'll look at this when we come to the second session, but we can look at it in a theory side. So select all from users where user ID equals to 1. So your intention will be this. Your intention will be you collect that user ID, maybe username here, right? And then your intention be like your intention be it ends here, right? So you get this from the user. Okay, I mean you get this one, it's this one, you get this ID from the user, and then your SQL stops here. So the guy, because has enough knowledge about SQL, what he does, so his SQL, you hope it will end here. So for him to provide his username equals to 200 like this is what you expect from him. So for him, he writes that, he goes ahead and writes O 1 equals to 1. So what does it mean? So he gives this in the what? In the username field. So for you, just go ahead and collect this and then concatenate it here and then execute. So when you concatenate it here, what does it mean? It means that it will take the whole thing. So this O, you know what's meant by O? If one condition is true, then the other one, I mean, then the statement will be executed. Like it will be considered to be all true. So this one might be wrong. He might have entered wrong username, but the database bases on this second condition. Okay, that the user created by himself, right? It bases on this one, and the end is up showing things that they are not really meant. So it confirms this one to be true. Okay, and then okay, go ahead to the next step. And then at the end of the day, someone will be able to access all the users in your database. Yet you made him to access a specific piece of data. So that one can expose you. So that is a weak point or a weakness in SQL. So that is one, and we are going to demonstrate in practicals in the next session. So another one is one is always equal to one. Okay, so that is another SQL type of injection. One is always equal to one. That is true, isn't it? A fact? It is a fact. So you can ask the user to enter his what? His password, and then the user added this second what? This second condition, or 1 equal to 1. So it means that this SQL will be considered to be true. So that is it. And another thing, empty string is got empty string. So the user can go ahead and add the empty string. At the end of the day, the SQL injection will happen. So the SQL injection based on batch SQL statement. So you can see here, maybe you are meant to execute only this SQL from user, right? And then because of input, the malicious person go ahead and add what? And add this. Wait, I want to show you. The malicious person go ahead and add this semicolon. You know what's meant by semicolon? SQL. It will stop the SQL. So it means that the SQL will be considered to stop from here. But in SQL, we are allowed to execute more than one statement. So for him, after he adds this, he go ahead and write another statement. Okay. Drop table, maybe transactions. So if you are careless, what happens? This statement will also be executed. At the end of the day, you don't have any transaction that you have ever done for the past 7 years that your business has been existing. So it is that dangerous, right? So it is that dangerous. And we're going to demonstrate this thing practically in the next lecture. So lastly, we have a SQL injection based on a batch comment. So a person can decide to comment. Okay, you SQL and do what? And do you see, this is how you comment in SQL. So a person can comment and then write his own what? His own SQL. Or he comment the remaining part. So he say, oh, 1 equal to 1, and then he comment the remaining part. So it means the remaining part will not be what? Will not be considered. So we have to be very careful in what? In the SQLs that we do what? That we implement. So that's it for the first session. The next session, you're going to look into practicals of how these things can be possible. Then we will conclude with what? With how we can overcome these SQL injections. But before we go for a short break, I'll have at least 2 people to say something. Just say something about what we talked about today, and then we'll have our short break. But don't go for break before I tell you. So can you have just 2 people to comment? A lady first, and then a gentleman. Okay.
Thank you. I think
okay. Also, by the way, also the main lecturer, you can
thank
conduct
you.
them and
So
tell them.
you guys were taking not more than I think even the time that has gone, and yet you need to do some practical sessions.
Not more than 5 minutes.
Let's take about 5 minutes, please.
Okay.
Josephine, can you make your comment?
Okay, first of all, thank you for the lecture. It was really helpful so far. Is the SQL injection always bad? And there are any circumstances where it is useful?
Okay, thank you. Daryl? Okay. Be close to the mic.
Be a little different. My question would be, when you talk about a SQL injection, isn't that a vulnerability with the SQL databases rather than programming languages? Because if I'm to use any of the languages that are vulnerable with a different kind of database, for example, a NoSQL database, either MongoDB or any other database that is not based on SQL, then in that case, I would not be vulnerable to SQL injection attacks.
Okay. So I respond to those 2 and then you go for a quick break. Okay, the first question, um, is it good or bad? Or is it always bad? It depends on how you want to use it. And the answer is yes and no. For example, if you have any way, you can execute SQL injection to a URL system so it cannot maybe tax. Or if you have an any way you can execute SQL injection to a Yaka system so that you don't pay electricity. So what does it mean? It means it has become good to you, but it's also bad to the system owner. So you'll have manipulated the other person who is what? Who is who you are supposed to be accountable for. So it is good for you, good bad for the other. But generally speaking, it is a very bad. And if you're quite, I mean, if you write program, you're not supposed to involve yourself in those kind of practices. You're supposed to know them so you can be able to avoid them, but don't be. You shouldn't. According to ethics of programming, you're not supposed to do those kind of what? Those kind of things. So it is good for someone who wants to use it for their own good, but it is bad for the someone who owns the system. So I think that's the answer. Then lastly, he's saying that it is not the programming languages that are vulnerable to SQL. It is SQL that is it. No, the answer is it's a programming language. And the question, the statement was clear. Programming languages that that interface with database. That statement was very clear. So as long as you're interfacing with the SQL database, I mean the database using SQL, then it means that that programming language is vulnerable, whether it is Python or what, because someone can pass through it creatively and execute an SQL injection through the programming language that you use to communicate with the database using SQL. If you're using no SQL, things like Firebase, where you don't need to write an SQL, so what does it mean? It means that there is no database that supports an SQL and you're not using what? An SQL database that is using SQL. So it means that it is of course that in that scenario there is no SQL injection because there's no SQL totally. But if you're using a database like MySQL, where you have to communicate to database using SQL, so that programming language, you cannot say that I'm going to use a specific programming language so I can be free from SQL injection. No. If you're using any kind of programming language and you're communicating database using SQL, then it means that you're prone to SQL injection. So I think that's it. We will go for 5 minutes. Then I think Dr. Drake will give you remarks when you open, and then we start practical. So at 11:35 we should be back. 11:35 we should be back for practical. Yeah.
Thank you, Mbara. So guys, take note of the calendar. 11:35, take a break, and then we'll be back.
Recording in progress.
Hello, Bixby. What? My watch.